Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails with me, Henry Faber. I'm one of the founders here at Opperton Education, and I'm really thrilled and very proud that we've got Anne-Marie Canning joining us from the Brilliant Club today. Thank you for joining. Anne-Marie has been CEO of the Brilliant Club since March 2020, I think I'm right in saying. So that's 4 years running this monster, heavy-hitting national charity for social mobility that runs provision in schools for students. So that definitely puts her top of my list of potential mentors. And by proxy, hopefully those following us as well. Prior to leading Brilliant Club, I know that Anne-Marie spent 7 years at KCL as Director of Social Mobility and Student Success, during which time she helped to establish things like What Works Centre, and I know she co-founded the award-winning parental engagement endeavour Parent Power too. She's held public appointments, she holds a Master's, an Oxford University Teaching Award, and I think since 2018 an MBE for Services for Higher Education. So I can't think we've had any more impressive introductions than that. Thank you for sharing the time during a busy week pre-Easter.
Not at all, and that's a very kind introduction. Thanks so much, Henry. You forgot the most important thing, though, which is that I'm from Donny, and so I'm very pleased to be here representing Doncaster.
Good, we'll get that in. We'll get plenty of that in too. And yeah, really, really excited to have you here. You know that we're passionate about mentoring at my organisation, and I know you're passionate about mentoring at your organisation. Tell me a little bit about your, feelings, perspective on mentoring. Did you have a mentor? Do you have a mentor now?
Oh, yeah, it's funny. I sort of have strong reactions to the word mentoring because I think it means so many different things to different people. But I have been lucky enough to have had a very special mentor since I was a student, and I found him sort of accidentally. Which is, I did a presentation back when I was an undergraduate in 2008. And this mentor, I'm just going to say who it is. It sounds like I'm name dropping. Honestly, I'm not. It's Greg Dyke. He was the Chancellor of the University of York, and he overheard someone telling me that I needed elocution lessons. They were specifically saying to me that I chewed on the word student, and then they're not wrong. But to come and tell me that I needed elocution lessons at the University of York as a Yorkshire student, Greg overheard that and came over and made a connection. And we've been sort of in contact ever since. In fact, I saw him just a couple of weeks ago for a chicken schnitzel and a conversation. And Greg's really important to me because I don't even see him that regularly, maximum like once or twice a year. But every time I see him, he says something that accelerates me. It galvanizes me. And I think his most valuable piece of advice that I've ever heard is he said to me, "You've got to go where you can make the most difference." And that's why I'm here at the Brilliant Club, right? I could have stayed in universities for the rest of my life. I loved working at King's, but I knew I needed to work for a charity that could go and serve children wherever they are. If they need us, we can be there. So I have a lot to sort of be grateful for in terms of connecting with Greg, and very grateful to that person who was rude about my accent.
That's an epic story, and you're now going to see something appear on LinkedIn about chicken schnitzel with Greg Dyke, and that's just going to
hit me up if you want to know the best
beautifully.
So,
thank you. That's wonderful. I love that idea of acceleration, that sense of like a little bit of rocket fuel that gets plugged in, and It doesn't even need to be that often. It's just that sense of like, it's like a good meeting when it just sort of somehow kicks something into gear and takes it to a different direction than it was otherwise going. I think that's great. What about school? Did you like school? Maybe an anecdote from school that tells us something a little bit about you.
I need to tell you a bit about my school to sort of understand my relationship with it. So I'm from a pit village in Doncaster, and all of these pit villages, we all went to a massive, massive school where 2,500 kids were being educated. And it was a school where, a minority of students were getting 5 good GCSEs. I think it was sort of 17% when I joined. It was in special measures, all of these things. We had an incredible set of teachers, but it was a really, really hard environment. I think Ofsted described it as having a anti-learning ethos. Now, I was the exact opposite of that. I loved learning. I was the most earnest student you could ever meet, but sort of operating in this environment where that was incredibly strange. And when I think back to my school years, there were a lot of uncomfortable experiences. Like, there's some funny ones as well. I was going to tell you about the time someone threw a Kit Kat chunky and it hit someone on the head and they had to go to hospital and have it stitched up, which is the worst scar in the world to have. Sort of Harry Potter mark from a Kit Kat chunky. Anyway.
Your scar or somebody else's?
No, someone else. But that was the sort of environment, that sort of element of chaos at all times. The school's now outstanding and in an incredible multi-academy trust, and I'm still really grateful for everything it taught me, both academically and socially. Thanks to that school, I can talk to anyone from any walk of life, and it really did ground me for the rest of my career and sort of personal life. But I feel like the thing I want to talk to you about is when I started applying to universities and coming from that environment. I remember meeting a student at my Oxford interview who said to me, I don't mind which one of us gets a place at Oxford. We've both worked equally as hard. And I thought, I don't think that can be true. Like, that's really kind, but I don't have teachers in 2 of my A-levels. So I know for a fact that we're not having to work equally as hard. And so I sort of came back from my Oxford interview to my school. And I think that was the moment I really understood educational inequality. And it was a really crystallizing moment for me. And it's something that I've held very close throughout my career, which is sort of understanding people are coming from different walks of life, different sort of benefits and privileges and different disadvantages. And it's one of the reasons I'm so committed to, the work of the Brilliant Club, but also things like contextual admissions that understand where people are coming from and where they could get to.
Great story. How did we get there from Kit Kat Junkie? It's just sort of that's amazing. Can I ask, it's slightly off my question list here, but we met at a conference at Eton College, and, like, my background is completely different from yours. And sometimes I have a huge imposter syndrome about that, working in a sector with that breadth of diversity of experience and people who know a lot about some things and a lot less about others. Like, how do you feel about all of that? Like, how does that play into your day to day, or does it not?
It's a really good question. And one thing I always sort of suggest to people is that imposter syndrome, like it can be a superpower if you want it to be. I think it's something that keeps us sort of learning and humble. But I don't actually suffer from it a great deal. And I know that's, I don't want that to sound arrogant, but I think one of the things you do as a highly socially mobile person is you become a little bit of a chameleon, right? Like, so I can sort of blend in and adapt to where I am. And I think my time at Oxford, so I didn't study at Oxford, but I worked there. And I think that gave me like a network and a set of experiences that have stood me in really, really good stead. And so I always encourage people to sort of get into different environments, environments that are as opposite as they could imagine to their, place where they're comfortable and feels familiar. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. So I found it really comfortable being at Eton. In fact, someone was laughing because they asked for directions, and I said, "Oh, it's over there." And they were like, "How do you know?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just noticed it on the way in." But like, I don't feel uncomfortable very often, is what I would say. And it's one of the things I really work with young people to do, which is like owning your story and stepping into places and being able to share it. So, I have a great deal of affection for Eton, which is, I'm sure, not what people expect me to say.
Yeah, it's funny, when I was framing the question also, I meant my own imposter syndrome in working in a sector where I know, much less about it than you do, or and not so much even your own discomfort of being at Eton, but what your take is on people from establishments. And but I think you've answered that beautifully, and I think it just shows that we're all walking our own path, and how great that those all blend into one if they're heading in the right direction and serving the right purpose. So what about tough moments career-wise? You've been in really interesting organisations, from KCL, now Brilliant Club, and all different types of places. What's been a really tough moment or a mountain along that way?
I think lots of leaders will talk to you about COVID and what that felt like and what it still feels like 4 years later. I was unlucky enough to time my move to the Brilliant Club on the first day of lockdown. So I sort of logged on, and, the choices laid out before me were, things like furlough and so on and so forth. And I think I spent a long time grieving, like, the leader I wanted to be. And I finally accepted that experience of becoming a CEO during COVID means I'll never be the leader I wanted to be at the Brilliant Club, but I can be a different version. And so I reckon a lot of folks will talk to you about that. And I still think we're in a space where we're grappling about what leadership is in the wake of COVID, and, changes to ways of working, and, massive changes to the social contract, I think, as well. So, that COVID period was really hard. But I also wanted to mention coming back from maternity leave. And this is unusual because I don't actually talk about my status as a mother very often. But when you come back from maternity leave, it's like you've had all your skin peeled off. You're sort of, it's like your nerves are open to the world in a way they weren't before. And I think if we could talk a little bit more about that return from maternity leave and some of the strategies you can use to sort of soften that and come back and it feel a bit more comfortable, and how organisations can help with that, I think that would be really good. I mean, Brilliant Club folks who covered my work were amazing. But no matter what, it's a huge transition. So I think normalising talking about return from maternity, I did a really short maternity leave as well. I think genuinely, if I'm honest, that was the toughest emotional experience I've had professionally. And then just sort of getting to grips with I used to be a bit of a wheeler dealer out at every event and networking and, a very full diary. Just can't do that anymore. And how do you lead and exist and do everything you need to do whilst also caring for a tiny, lovely child as well? So I would say that's been a sort of uniquely tough experience.
There's got to be a book in that, surely. There's got to be something out there already that can help organisations. Because from running an organisation, I feel like that's advice I really need, as much as giving a toolkit to people who are coming back from mat leave. I think it's a really tough thing to navigate in terms of where people stand. And yeah, that's a really interesting one. Positives, best moments, any obvious peaks?
Oh, there's so many lovely moments. There's just so many lovely moments. I think that's one of the beauties of our jobs in education. Every day is sprinkled with just these amazing moments that in some ways they're fleeting and you don't remember all of them. But I want to talk about my last few weeks at King's and something that brought my experience of working there full circle. So I worked at King's for an awful long time. In fact, a period of time where my friends and people my age would be like, what are you doing? You've been there for so long. But I remember one summer, it was A-level results day, and we used to run a hotline for students who maybe hadn't got their grades and to sort of help them through that process. And at 7 p.m, the phone calls had gone, and I sent the team home, and I said, I'll just look after the calls for the next couple of hours. And a student called, and they didn't speak for a while because they were so upset. And I stayed on the line and chatted to her. It was a student where her university that had offered her a place had held on to her until 8 p.m. at night and then released her, so declined her. And this meant she'd missed out on finding any other places. So she was a medical student. She'd missed out on finding a second choice place. And what it meant for that student is she would become homeless. And so it was a very difficult call. And me being a fixer and a solutionizer, I was like, I'll get you a place on global health or something like that. We'll find you a place. That means you can have accommodation. You don't have to present as homeless. And she's like, let me think about it for 24 hours. I was like, okay, I'll ring you back tomorrow. That student turned down a place that would mean she had a secure home to go back round the system and do her A-levels again and secure the grades. And so, I was amazed by that. I just thought she was incredible because I don't think I would have had the strength to do that age 17 or 18. So the sort of story ends there. She goes back to the A-level system and I carry on doing my work at King's. But in my final few weeks at King's, they asked me to do a sort of goodbye speech at a particular dinner. And I knew there were lots of medics there because King's is a very medical heavy place. But as I sat down at the dinner, the person next to me said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Oh, I'm Marie Canning." And it was the student from all those years earlier. And my spine still tingles now because she resat her A-levels, reapplied to King's, got a fresh offer, gone through the system again, secured a place, and now was studying and becoming a medic. And for me, it just reminded me of the incredible tenacity of students from some really difficult backgrounds. And it was very emotional, but it felt important as a sort of full circle moment for me. And that experience of answering her phone call on results day means I am so committed to sort of transition support from school to university for students. There's no reason people should be left alone standing like that in the middle of results day. So yeah, an amazing experience. And she's now a very successful doctor too.
God, how lovely. That's a really, really great one. Thank you. Content. People love content. How do you get your content? Are you reading? Are you watching? Are you listening? Share something with us that can give us something for, the post-Easter period or the end of the holidays.
Yeah. Oh, Henry, I've got a terrible TikTok addiction. I shouldn't admit that, really. I promise I read loads of books. Look at my shelf. I am a big reader. I'm less of a listener, like podcasts and stuff. I love conversations, but I find listening to things just doesn't sink into my brain. My TikTok habits are yeah, it's the way I understand what's going on with young people, what's going on in schools. It's where I get a lot of my parenting advice from. I learned so much from TikTok, and I know it's not cool to admit that, but it's the reality. It's the reality. So I am very omnivorous culturally. So yeah, I will read a really nice piece of literature, but I'll also dot off and have an hour on TikTok, and I do have to limit myself because I could be on there all day. Thank you, algorithm. But in terms of things I'd recommend to people, sort of game-changing things that I've read, I am a literature graduate, so I do love reading sort of fiction and works of art. And there's so many amazing books about social mobility. And I'm going to recommend a particular book. It's by a guy called Raymond Williams, actually writing in about the Welsh higher education experience. So it's called Border Country, and it's about a young man who leaves his pit village and goes off and becomes a lecturer at a university, and then goes home in his dad's sort of elder years. So yeah, that would be a particularly lovely read. And it's the reason I like it is it's so calming. Lots of social mobility sort of memoirs or pieces of fiction are quite, and it's always a little bit traumatizing. But I really like this because it's very calm assessment of sort of the emotional terrain of being socially mobile. So yeah, I would recommend that. And then on the sort of like journal or academic piece, I have this really helpful idea that I came across, tiny piece of work by Pierre Bourdieu about habitus clevae, cleft habitus, this idea that when we become socially mobile, we live in between two worlds. And what does that mean for us? And that has been a really, really helpful concept for me personally, but also in my sort of professional practice as well. So they're my two recommendations. Go off to the Welsh Valleys and read Border Country, and then go off to Paris and read Pierre Bourdieu's Cleft Habitus.
We went really, really high level there after the TikTok algorithm. I thought that was all you're going to give me at first. But I have to say, although I'm going to check out Border Country in particular, that's the one that sticks with me, is I want to see your algorithm, because I reckon you're getting different videos than I see my sisters watching on TikTok. And
have you ended up on Hog Talk? Yeah, this is a particularly delightful corner. It's just wild hogs running around to dance music. It's fantastic. It's an absolute tonic when you've had a hard day. So yeah, my algorithm, it's wild.
Yeah, I sort of want to follow you, but I also am kind of considering getting like a Nokia brick phone or something, like there's part of me that just wants to disengage with all of that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
For another time. Thank you. That was wonderful. All right, we've got time for two very sneaky quick questions. An unpopular opinion.
Yes.
Something that you feel you'd stand up and be proud to be unpopular with.
It's going to be very unpopular saying it here. I don't like podcasts.
That's fine. I got no problem with that at all.
Oh, there's not worse than someone saying, "Oh, listen to a really great podcast," and then they tell you an idea that they've listened to for like 45 minutes, like they've just done a thesis in it. And I don't know. I find podcasts really hard. I don't seem to be someone who like has the ability to let things sink in through an ear. It's terrible, right? I like conversations with people, but I find it really difficult to listen to audiobooks and things like that. I'd much rather read. So yeah, I always, if people say, "I've got a great podcast recommendation for you," I'd be like, no. So that is very unpopular. I've only met one other person.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I mean, that's why we've gone short form with this. It's funny. I like podcasts because I can listen to them when I'm on the tube or in the car and I can't do anything else. And I get that frustration of like, I can't be on my emails and I can't read and I can't write or whatever. So I just listen. And I quite like that I can educate myself sort of passively. Whereas when I read, I fall asleep. That's my problem.
Yeah. So
I need to be reading for like pure joy, because if I'm reading to educate myself, my attention span's dwindled. But yeah, I think that's not that's not crazy. We've had I thought we were going to go more unpopular than that, but I think it's a good one. It's a personal one. I like it. And last but not least, one piece of advice for people in the sector. You've got a lot to share, I'm sure, but what really comes to mind at the top of the list?
One practical one and one sort of more heartfelt one. Do some communications work. Learn how to do communications work. And I was really lucky to do a secondment as a communications manager when I worked at Oxford. And I really do think that was the making of me in some way. So get a professional skill set around communications. It's like catnip to employers. It's just such a valuable thing to be able to communicate effectively and powerfully. So, learn some communication skills, put them into practice, maybe even do a bit of a qualification around that. That would be my number one recommendation. My second one is to always put relationships first. I think we work in an environment, just to sort of take it a bit broader, like we live in a society where no one is really making time for relationships in the way that we used to. I think it's a very radical act to put the person in front of you first. So I live by the maxim people before program. That comes from a community organising sort of methodology. But I really do think investing in relationships, be them sort of acquaintances or more deep relationships, I think that is the key to success in all different parts of your life. So put relationships first.
Lovely. Two great things to pause on there. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing this time. Lots of really great nuggets, lots of good humour too, which we like. Education doesn't have to be stale. And thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.